Welcome to The Other Coast, a podcast detailing the Malifaux meta in Los Angeles. My name is Jeff, and with me here is another SoCal player, Colgan.
Hey everyone.
Hey Colgan. So tonight we are going to talk about versatiles. You know, what it is, what we think of the versatile system, what we think works, what we think doesn't, and what we might like to see Weird do differently in terms of kind of the philosophical role that versatiles will have in the game. So to start us off, I'll just explain really briefly. Versatiles, quality models can have, and what it means is that any model or any crew can hire them without having to pay the extra one soulstone tax for them not sharing a keyword with the leader. And these are models that, they generally, they don't tend to share a theme really with any keyword, although some keyword models are versatile. But a lot of them, like, say, the emissaries or the riders, are just models that really don't seem like they would necessarily fit in any specific keyword. So, I guess to start us off, Colgan, what is the problem with versatile models? Like, what's caused us to make an episode about them?
You're just starting right off with it. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we were talking about is the fact that there isn't any additional cost. So the problem comes that if everything is costed correctly, which is what you'd expect, right? Like a 5-stone model, all 5-stone models ideally should be balanced against one another.
Well, I mean, that's the goal. We all realize that kind of balance is probably impossible, especially in an asymmetric game like Malifaux. But no, I mean, I would agree that's the theory behind the costing system.
Right, like we're never going to get there, but you shouldn't see like, oh, this 5-cost model has like 10 health, min 3 attacks, and like armor 5, while this 5-cost model has like 4 HP and nothing.
What about a 5-cost model with hard to kill, armor 1, and extended reach and 2-inch range? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that seems perfectly fine. I mean, we all know that's what you expect. You want like 5 or 6 abilities in your 5-cost models, so they're just really not worth taking.
So I mean, before we totally just derailed your thought, so you're saying, if all models are properly costed, and in theory versatiles are, they also are properly costed, the fact that they're not paying a tax, why is that an issue?
Right. So, I mean, one of the design goals that was stated was that they wanted to kind of get away from the Super Friends thing in the second edition. And they wanted to have people kind of play more thematic crews or have a reason to play more thematic crews, which is why they introduced the keyword system and introduced the out of keyword tax. So basically, anytime you're hiring models outside of your keyword, you're paying a little bit more for the benefit of the skills and flexibility they bring to your crew. But when you have versatile models, cost-wise, they're the exact same as models in keyword. And assuming, since we're striving for balance, all these keyword models are going to be competing, or all these versatile models are going to be competing for spots against your keyword models. And then it kind of reintroduces that Super Friends issue. So if these versatile models are outperforming your keyword models, there's really no reason to start hiring keyword models because you're gaining no benefit from it and you're just making a weaker crew.
Right. And I mean, we'll go into this also when we talk about the keyword episode, and I think this will be one of the central planks in that episode as well. But a friend of mine who has worked as a CCG developer for Babylon 5 and Wheel of Time and I think some other games, he put it in that he said great cards crowd out good cards, and good cards crowd out bad cards, and that's true also in Malifaux. And I think ultimately, for a long time we were shielded by the fact that the edition was new and that people were mostly just playing in keyword. But now increasingly we're seeing that people have identified kind of the most efficient models, or the at least they managed to identify some models that are overtuned. And so we're starting to see a lot of crews that include these models, and we're in danger of kind of falling back into a Super Friends range. And when you have the ability to hire without any increased cost, because just a one soulstone tax is not going to fix the Super Friends. Ultimately, if one model is more efficient than another, and it's more efficient by an amount to where that it overcomes the tax increase, you're going to include the overtuned model. But versatiles, I think, make it harder to to avoid falling into a Super Friends meta.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think, one of the things you brought up is it makes it a little harder to see it, right? Because if everyone's taking models out of keyword and paying that tax, then that's a pretty clear sign that they're undercosted for what they bring. If everyone agrees that, oh, if you add one to their cost, they're still worth taking over any other model at the same cost within keyword. I feel like it's a pretty clear indication that something, either the keyword is way underpowered or these models are above the curve or do way more than they should be doing for their cost.
No, I would definitely agree with that. So, there's a lot more I think that could be said about this subject, but it's kind of, I think it's something that we're really going to want to talk about in our keyword episode quite a bit. So I'm going to move on now to what we listed as maybe a second issue with some of the versatiles in our pre-show outline. And that was that they're not as thematic. And I think when we wrote this, we were kind of talking about the like the orphan versatiles, right? Like Hinamatsu is a versatile, but she's in a keyword and she fits in the keywords that she's in thematically. But like the effigies and the riders, just the models that Yasunori, right? The models that don't have a keyword native to themselves, that they just have versatile, they're not. Why is it a problem that they're maybe not as thematic?
This is really, I think, going to be kind of more on like how you view the game in and of itself, right? If you kind of like the more narrative stuff, the more lore driven stuff, it's nice to see like a crew that has a very strong identity. It's like when you're playing against like Jackdaw, you see all these guys with gallows people, right? Like people that are being executed and stuff like that. But if you start throwing in all these versatiles, like, okay, they're running around with giant pigs as well. Like all these ghosts. So it can kind of break the immersion a little bit. I think from a gameplay perspective, it can also be a little bit difficult as well because, if you're going against Daw, you're expecting, a lot of staggered, a lot of terrify and things like that. So you might take against that. But if they're able to like go heavily armored or like a very high speed, fast damage crew, it's going to completely mess with your expectations and it's going to be much harder to strategize. And you could end up teching completely wrong and just being, what's the right word for it?
What, like blindsided?
Yeah, completely blindsided because like, oh, they're showing this master, but their crew is nothing like the thematics of that keyword because they just hired in all versatiles.
Right. And so then that's a problem where, it's not down to the individual model level. It's not like, oh, we included one versatile and that's a problem, because in fact the ability to shake up what an opponent expects, that's a good thing in Malifaux. I mean, I'm sure you would agree with that. But the way you put it at the end, I think is the most important, because part of the issue with versatiles is that you can bring a crew that maybe has no relation to what that master's keyword is supposed to be doing, right? Colette is a great example. Right now, Colette Super Friends is a very powerful list, and it's kind of similar to how she played in second, although in second people usually brought Howard Langston, or at least frequently did. And now you pretty much never see that just because they're better options for what she wants to do. But if your opponent is declared Colette and you don't know about Colette Super Friends, and you're expecting kind of to play against this sort of schemy crew, and you end up getting steamrolled by a magical cow and some robot girl, on a horse who's reactivating everything, it's you're kind of like, well, why are people complaining about Colette's keyword? She seems very strong to me. To the extent that it really kind of undermines the keyword system, that's where I have really kind of this not as thematic issue. I think another element of it is the fact that not all keywords have the same degree of synergy within each other, right? So you mentioned Daw. Daw's a great example, because Daw, he's healing and drawing cards when his keyword models are damaging enemy models that have upgrades, right? But versatile models, unless they're a versatile model that's part of a keyword, like Hinamatsu or something, versatile models don't have the abilities that tie them with keywords because they're not part of keywords, right? And even for the versatile models that are keyworded, if you've brought them out of keyword, they're not going to have that synergy either. And so I think it undermines that kind of keyword reliance or that keyword synergy. And so versatiles are much more accessible to masters and that don't and keywords, masters and keywords that don't have a high degree of reliance on their specific keyword mechanics. which is another reason why Colette's Super Friends, and I mean, I hate to keep railing on this, but I'm disappointed because in second edition, I mained Colette, and I just, when the keywords first came out and I saw Colette's keyword and it was kind of trying to do interesting things, and so I'm disappointed to see that the best way to play her is basically, the same way to play her in second edition. But the reason you can do it is because Colette as an individual model is very strong, and she has absolutely no reliance on her keyword at all. So you start with a great master, and you add in 50 stones or, 40-something stones because you want a cache. 40-something stones of great models, and you have a great crew. But do you have a thematic crew? Like, is the keyword system really proving its viability at that point?
Right. I mean, I think it also like compounds the issues, right? I felt like, looking at the performer keyword, it relies very heavily on Colette to kind of do, the heavy lifting for fighting or like rearranging so she can free up all the other models in a keyword to kind of like move around and scheme.
Mm-hmm.
But then it kind of seems like as a whole, her keyword is kind of underpowered, or at the very least, like as you were saying, there's no reason to run Colette with her keyword because you can get better models that are more efficient at everything they do, and Colette still works great. Like, she's still very much a one-man show or one-woman show, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I mean, great crowds out good and good crowds out bad. Cassandra is, maybe she's not bad, but she's definitely not great, and I would argue she probably hovers below good. So why would you pay the 8 stones on her when you can pay the 10 stones for the Arcane Emissary, right? Or you can pay 6 stones for a Mech Arachnid, or the same cost, 8 stones, same cost as her for Steam Arachnid Swarm. And it's not like a 1 stone tax is necessarily going to change that, but if you're bringing in 2 or 3 versatile models, that's an upgrade. Or that might be the difference between, a 6 or a 7 model crew. So I do think that, kind of going back to maybe they should all pay a tax.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who's thinking, well, I can always just pay the 1 more stone. You are right. In an individual case, it's not going to be determinative. But in the aggregate, it definitely does add up.
I don't think like one change is going to magically fix everything. But it will help inform decisions, right? Because if having to pay this tax, even with paying that extra tax, like no one using Colette is ever using her keyword, I think that's just telling you like her keyword is not in a good place.
They do bring the duet.
Well, I guess the duet's in a good place, but it'll inform that decision, right? Because if every time this is the only master that we're seeing that's constantly bringing things out of keyword just to compete with all the other masters, then it shows that there's an issue with the keyword or how it's performing against everyone else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I would agree. All right. So the next issue we have on the list is that the versatiles are uneven between the factions. Right? They're not internally balanced as a universe, right? As the universe of versatiles.
Mm.
So why is that a problem, right? Because I mean, every faction has plenty of models. What does it matter if one faction's versatiles are better than another's?
I guess as a whole, this just kind of comes back to the whole balance thing, right? I mean, it gives. I guess it'll also lean it towards heavily meta-wise to play into that faction because all of a sudden, like, all those masters are going to be much stronger because they have access to these kind of overtuned models that they're able to get at cost. I feel like it just kind of exacerbates all the problems that we've kind of mentioned up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
Except now with, these factions, it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're playing 10 Thunders. Here's your master. Now grab all these versatile models because they're just far and ahead better than anything in their class. And because, like at whatever soulstone cost you're looking at or whatever role you're looking to fill, if one faction is just like filled with amazing versatiles that are just out competing all their other models, you're kind of seeing that super friends thing. And then it'll start having an effect on other factions because they're only going to be able to use keywords that are also overtuned in order to compete,
Mm-hmm.
or they're just going to be completely left by the wayside because they have nothing that can match the power that the entire faction has access to if their versatiles are just kind of so far and above what everyone else is able to bring to the table.
Right. And I think another thing it does is it makes it difficult to really appreciate what the balance issues are, right? So Shenlong, when he was first launched, he was just way too good. And the changes they did to him, they were effective. They were effective modifications. But, part of what made Shenlong so strong was that, he had Fuhatsu, and he had the Shadow Emissary, and, he could have Samurai, and a lot of these changes are made in isolation, right? When they changed Shenlong, they didn't also change the monk keyword. So what was happening is Shenlong was performing very well, and he was very strong, and so they nerfed him. And so as a result, Shenlong just doesn't see play nearly as much, right? You can still get all the other models that he got. Quite a nice crew, because the 10 Thunders of Access to great versatiles, except for Yasunori, who got, nerfed into the ground. But, they said, like, okay, well, the problem with Shenlong is that Shenlong is too good. Not that Shenlong has an access to this stable of versatiles that just brings so much to what he's trying to do. Okay, well, I guess that's, kind of, again, more along the lines of great crowds out good, but I just, and we say all this without any sense of that Weird's doing a bad job. This is not an easy game to make and an easy game to fix. And so I just, I don't want to sound like I'm intensely critical of Weird's developers. I think on the whole, they've done a pretty good job. It's interesting to me how Shenlong went from like an S tier master. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like talking about tiers of Malifaux, but he went from like top of the list to, kind of just sort of middling, which I think is probably where you want everyone to be. You probably want everyone to be kind of middling.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Okay, so I guess that does roll kind of naturally into our next thing, which is that versatiles may hide issues with models and keywords and factions. And I think what we mean by that is that kind of, going again off the Shenlong thing, if Shenlong's winning a bunch of games because he's good and because he has a stable of great versatiles, it hides the fact that maybe the monk keyword isn't very good, right? Is that what we mean by this entry?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of touched on it. We're seeing the same thing kind of happening with Colette at this point, right? She's considered a top tier master, but if you're like, oh man, Colette's great, everyone says she's the master I should run, I'll go pick up her entire keyword and run with that, and then you're not seeing any success. It's like, oh, you fool. Like, why would you use her keyword models?
Yeah, and I also think it makes it harder for newer players to understand how they're supposed to be playing the game, right? If you pick up Colette and you kind of do a little bit of online reading, but not too deep to where you have learned about Super Friends. Mm. But, you're reading like, oh, the performer keyword is kind of schemy, you're sort of like trying to do misdirection or trying to avoid direct conflict and trying to meet your goals and make it inefficient for your enemy to meet your goals, right? And you think, okay, well, I mean, that sounds cool. Why am I struggling in game? Mm-hmm. And it's because, well, your keyword models just aren't really very good. And the other people who are saying Colette is great, they're saying that because they're taking these other models that are overtuned.
Yeah, well, I mean, ideally, again, you want things to be kind of balanced to the point. Like, ideally, and everything that is the same cost is going to be about as effective as the other. And hiding these issues with these keywords, it kind of hurts in the long run, right? Because basically now, like, all right, Colette's really strong, so we're not going to touch her keyword, but her entire keyword isn't really seeing play. It's a bunch of models that are basically non-existent. Like, sure, they're there, but you're never going to run them because they're just so much less effective than the versatiles. And you can't really call like, oh man, let's buff the performer keyword while Colette's already running around like taking heads everywhere she goes.
Right, yeah, I mean, I guess that was kind of my point, is that these keywords are clearly introduced with a sense of how they should be played. Now, of course, the developers didn't really, you can't game out ahead of time how people are going to play anything like Malifaux, right? Because Malifaux is just so complex that even the most far-sighted developers are never really going to appreciate the depth of the game once it gets into the hands of the community. And that's a good thing, because that's how games grow. If you had a game that the developers already understood how it was going to work out from day one, that's probably a pretty stale game without very much depth. But the keyword identity, it maybe shouldn't be determinative of how you play, but it should always influence how you're going to play. And the issue we're seeing, I think, with with the Super Friends crews, whether they were in GG0 with Shenlong or right now, for instance, with Colette, is that they undermine that development philosophy. And so it makes it harder, I think, to make proper changes going forward.
Yeah, and I think it also just kind of like forces you to be aware of the meta, right? Because if you're like, oh, I'm aware of Colette, she's supposed to be very schemy, she's going to drop scheme markers everywhere, she's going to be very hard to like land a solid hit on. But then you go into the game and it's like, oh, no, she's just running into me with like 2 or 3 bruisers and just killing and massacring my entire crew, right? It's a very different thing that we're expected to play against. And the only way to really know that is if, you're keeping very up to date on the meta and just kind of ignoring the actual kind of designer notes on the design behind the crew and the keyword.
Right. When on other podcasts, you'll often hear people say something like, the first thing you see something new in Malifaux, you're going to get run over. And they talk about that as a feature, right? Not a bug. Like, you just have to see it and lose a terrible game and then learn what you need to do next time. And not that you're always going to lose every time you see anything new. And I don't think that the people who say that really, really believe it in those stark terms. But telling someone that you have to lose to something first is not like a great selling point for a game.
Just sounds like you're not masochistic enough.
And so what I think the keyword system kind of was supposed to do was to say, okay, you've never seen McMorning before, but flipping through his keyword, you can see that, his guys care about poison, he has a way to use poison, and other than that, like, they're mostly these melee beaters. And so you can form a pre-game sense of what you're supposed to do against McMorning. Mm-hmm. But that concept only works because of the way Malifaux list building works. That concept only holds true if you're going to see keyword crews, or at least crews that have a greater than not reliance on their keyword.
Right.
Because otherwise, against Super Friends lists, it's just knowing what those Super Friends do.
Building off of that, right? There's a very big difference, I feel, between not understanding like the extent or how much power is in a keyword versus being completely blindsided by what they're bringing to the table, right? Because it's like, oh, they're a melee heavy faction, like, oh, I should bring in like, some way of like slowing them down or making sure they don't get in contact with my guys. But when they hit the table, it's like, oh, never mind, they have a gun line and they're just gonna shoot me off the board.
Yeah. One of my friends in second edition, he run a Misaki gunline crew, and it's actually I inherited his Misaki models when he left the game, and the Torikage weren't even built because he had he had Fuhatsu and he had Samurai and he had a gunline crew, and it's like, yeah, here's my unbuilt keyword models. Of course, there wasn't a keyword system back then, but models were still thematically tied to each other. And so, yeah, I think that really just kind of illustrates what we're talking about. All right, so the next issue we have is that versatiles constrain list building. And this kind of goes to the fact that, versatile models, great models crowd out good and good crowd out bad. And so if versatile models are those great models, if they are overtuned to the point where they should always be taken, it kind of shrinks the universe of viable crews. I mean, I hesitate to say viable because anyone can win with anything, in theory anyways. But, the more auto-includes you see in a game, or the more models that are kind of considered auto-include among, sort of the knowledgeable meta, the less versatility, pardon the pun, the less versatility we're going to see in lists in general, right?
Right. I guess, like, for me, Malifaux's in a good place when you have keyword models that are, kind of like indispensable when you're running that master, but when you're looking out of keyword, they're probably not worth it because you're not able to build that synergy or you're not able to use them to the full effect, right? But then part of that is going to be the fact that you're going to have to pay that extra cost for them, right? Like, are they really worth, is this 5 stone model really worth 6 stones, not able to actually take advantage of its keyword abilities?
Right.
Whereas like versatiles, they don't have a keyword ability that's kind of being factored into their cost. They're sitting at 8 stones, and then if the keyword ability or the synergy isn't strong enough that it's really even necessary, then you're looking at these versatile models that you don't have to pay a tax for, and they're just going to be outperforming your models because your keyword models are just basically bringing some skills that you don't really need.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Okay, and then, finally, we touched on this earlier, but it's harder to answer versatile models. And I think this is mostly an issue for newer players, or maybe players who Malifaux isn't their whole life, so they don't consume Malifaux media and kind of have a sense of what's considered good and what you should expect to see on a table when someone declares a master versus kind of a keyword sense, right? And so this is one of the things that it's maybe an experience gap. And there are people who say, well, experience gaps are skill gaps, and a good game, the more experienced players should win more often. And that's true. One of the knocks on a game like 40K is that you just have to be lucky, right? There aren't that many tactical decisions. If you print out the best list from the internet and you go and you roll a bunch of sixes, you're going to win the game, no matter what your opponent did and pretty much no matter what you did. So it's not that experience shouldn't matter at all, but because versatiles are this pool of cheaply accessible models, if you are not kind of tuned into what's good and what's bad, you have less of an idea of what to bring to a game. I think that's what we mean by this, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think even when you become more experienced, the harder issue is that, the whole pregame thing of where they select their faction, where they select their faction and where they select their master can become very uneven, right? So if one faction, as mentioned earlier, has a very strong pool of versatile models, you're going into this and maybe your master is a bit more constrained, you kind of need your keyword models, you need to lean into your synergy a bit more. Well, now the opponent has a lot of options to tech against you, but you can't really go out of your keyword system without breaking everything, or losing all your strengths, or your versatile keywords, or your versatile models don't actually have enough flexibility to allow you to build a functioning crew to replace the synergy that you have from running your master in keyword.
Right. I mean, it's interesting, for instance, that a model like Jackdaw. Jackdaw's a good model, but he cannot do a Super Friends list. Well, I say that, and people are going to make a Super Friends list and totally just show me up, right? But Jackdaw is a model that is tied to his keyword with a high degree of synergy there. And so even though Daw is pretty powerful, and you sometimes see people online complaining about him, generally not really the more experienced players, but if you're kind of newer and you got brutalized by him, I could definitely understand why you would think he's overpowered. But when you play against Daw, it tells you that, well, he's not going to have a bunch of versatiles, right? And it makes it that much easier to build your list against him than he has against you if you are a crew that doesn't have the same dependency on the keyword.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess, we kind of min damaged that topic. Let's go on to what role should versatiles have in the game? Start us off, Colgan.
They should not exist.
So we should just throw all those models in the garbage can?
To expand a bit more, I just feel like if you have the keyword system, then you should kind of stick with it. I feel like everything should be in a keyword, and if you're taking something out of keyword, you're paying that tax for it. So if you want that extra tech, if you're going to need to lean into that a little bit, then you're going to have to pay some kind of cost for going out of it. And I think that's going to help we want these crews to be more thematic. We want keywords to be a big part of the game. But then versatiles kind of throw that out the window a little bit. So I think that versatiles should belong to keywords. You have the asylum keyword, right? That I don't think I've ever seen on the table, but they're there. And then it also kind of might make it so that, running henchman crews make a little bit more sense, right? So it's okay, there's this really good, orphaned keyword that doesn't have a master, but they have some pretty good models and they have interesting synergy. So if I'm going to bring them in, I'm going to have to run this henchman master so I can actually bring in a complete asylum crew or whichever keyword you're looking to play as. And then I think it'll help, bring to light the issues of weaker keywords or masters that are struggling a little bit.
Now, I do want to say that, and I've heard on other podcasts that weird developers say that they consume pretty much all the Malifaux media. Now, they very well may not know about us because, I mean, we're a pretty small outfit. But if weird developers do listen to this, please give the Asylum models experimental. When they came out in second edition, you were able to take them with McMorning because McMorning was guild back then. He was guild reser, and now he's not, so he just doesn't have access to them. And thematically, visually, they just very much belong there. And I would do it in at least a game or two just for fun, even though I don't think that they really work all that well together. When you say that
Wait, so you're using your like one fleet of weird to ask them to make models so you can play them for like 1 or 2 games and then never touch them again because you don't even think they'll work in the keyword you want them to add them to?
My one plea? What are you talking about? This entire podcast is basically like a plea to weird. I'm certainly not doing this to showcase my victorious record in Malifaux because I'd have to acquire a victorious record first.
So then once you slide in their DMs, we can just shut down the podcast.
Well, yeah, maybe if Weird does want to close us down, just give us those asylum in mid-morning, and I guess we can... So when you say they should just not have versatile, would you try to find homes for these orphan? Like, as we said, some versatile models do have keywords, like Hinamatsu, she's already in, 2 keywords, in fact. But like the Yasunori's not in a keyword. Would you try, would you make a keyword just for Yasunori or just for like the 10 Thunders versatiles to sit in? Or would you try to find homes for those models? I think Yasunori belongs in Last Blossom keyword. I'm just throwing out a random one. What would you do there?
I think it would be really context dependent, right? Because you could definitely do something like how you have Crossroads 7, right? Like maybe for all the riders, you could have like a rider keyword. So if someone wants to run all the riders together, like that's something they could do.
Well, only if they had a leader with the rider keyword, because they're all enforcers. Also, that should never, ever, ever, ever happen.
If we can change keywords, Jeff, we can make some other changes. It's not like if we change the game, we're going to limit ourselves in this magical, phantasmical world where we actually know what the fuck we're doing as far as game balance goes.
Well, okay, but I do not want to see 4 riders on the table.
Well, I do, so...
How about 8 emissaries?
Sure. I'm down for anything. I just want to see all this jank. Really at this position that I've kind of like dug my heels into, I have to accept these conditions necessarily, so... But I mean, like as options as things you could do, like I think, you could definitely maybe like, hey, they make sense in this keyword, like you were saying, asylum should maybe be with experimental. And then these other things that don't necessarily have a keyword, maybe they just have their own keyword that you could expand into later. Or, you have something like Crossroads 7 where you have an option where it's like, oh, we're going to run this henchman master and run this keyword. Like, I think those are all viable options. But I guess just the biggest thing is that I think you should always have attacks when you're going out of keyword, or else you start seeing, the issue you're saying with like overcrowding or just hiding weak keywords because the masters are being supplemented by very good versatiles within their faction.
Got it. I think that would be, maybe a change to consider, just always having to pay to go out of keyword. Another way, maybe from a development philosophy, right, to have a stronger concept of what role versatile models are serving in the game. Mm-hmm. Because currently I don't really understand what the role of versatile models are, because you can't say that, they are niche anti-tech, or that they are meant to do something that the faction generally just is bad at. Because I actually, when I look at the universe of versatile models, I don't see kind of like a guiding line between like why a model is versatile or not, except for thematics. Like, the emissary doesn't belong in any key, like he belongs to the entire faction, so we're just going to make him versatile.
Right.
So what are some kind of like clear roles that versatiles could play in the game?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, I guess this isn't exactly answering your question, but the fact that like the faction identities, I think Weird has done such a good job with like creating very unique playstyles for each master. The idea of having like a catch-all category in each faction to like, oh, this is what we're going to have so that, masters in this faction don't struggle against this one thing is a very difficult thing to do. Mm-hmm. But that is kind of one of the routes you could go, because like I think you'd mentioned this earlier in the pre-show that like Bayou in general struggles against armor, so maybe their versatiles would be something that has like anti-armor tech. Mm-hmm. But like if we were going to go that route, you probably want them costed maybe a little bit higher than keyword things. I guess I'd still be pulling for the added keyword stuff. but like you would want them to have very specific purpose within the keyword, or to like answer issues that they have, or like known weaknesses for the faction.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with that. So anti-X tech is one role the Versatiles could have served, right? The anti-armor for the Bayou, some root, making sure everyone has at least some access to some rootless, or we had that episode about summoning, right? So maybe giving people anti-summoning tech doesn't all have to be exorcism, could be other stuff, but basically just having, and not maybe a ton of these options, or maybe not every faction has all of these options, but just giving a pool of anti-X tech models,
right,
is one possible way, I think, to maybe philosophically think about what models should be versatile, or what versatiles should do.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like the biggest issue is that, we're not quite sure what role versatiles are meant to play, because there's factions that don't have any way of really getting ruthless on demand, or no way to easily remove markers. So like, I think like Neverborn will just really struggle against some masters like Rasputina, just because they don't have access to easy marker removal, like some things like like there's Mad Dog from the Outcast who has like Blow to Hell. So then they can struggle a bit more because they just don't have that, and even in their versatile bag they don't have anything to help them out with that.
Right.
But like one potential issue I could see us like kind of just exacerbating the issue and making it worse, because now suddenly everyone has access to everything. So now we've just expanded the versatile problem to the point where it's like, oh, you're playing against Rasputina, then you take your anti-marker versatile, and no matter which faction you are. So it's like now you have like a versatile, an anti-master versatile like pairing for every master you're playing against.
Right, and this really illustrates, I think, the challenge that Weird faces, right? Because, I mean, we've probably said it on this podcast, and if we haven't, I'm sure I'll say it at some point, that auto-take models are a sign of poor design, or at least suboptimal design, right? If a model is an auto-include, it's probably too good. But at the same time, we're saying, well, versatiles should be available as answers, and that's going to make them, kind of auto-include in the situations where they are the answer. And I don't think there's a way to square that circle.
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult thing to do, because you're saying, all right, this is going to be our anti-summoner tech. And then it's like, oh, they're a summoner, I should bring the anti-summoning model. And if it's in a case where it's like, well, they're not good enough to even bring into the situation in which they're designed for, then that's just a dead model.
Right, yeah. So I freely admit, this is not an easy process, and Weird has on the whole done a good job. But I think my knock against versatiles, that really kind of goes to the heart of the matter, right? Like when you're writing and you're getting feedback, the expression is like, try to figure out what the note is behind the note, right? Sometimes you get feedback that you think is stupid or that makes no sense, but it's not necessarily about addressing someone's specific feedback. It's about trying to figure out like what their underlying issue was that made them say the specific thing they said. And for me, the underlying issue that I have currently with the versatile models that exist is that I do not feel like a strong sense of designer philosophy in why the models that are versatile, except for, as I mentioned, the few thematic options.
Right. But then, we also see that we have some orphaned models that are part of a keyword, and there's nothing really else in that keyword, but then they're also versatile so that anyone can hire them. And the question is, well, why are they versatile and that keyword instead of just being like an orphaned asylum model?
Right. Are there going to be more asylum models?
I mean, like, yeah, I don't know, like personally, I would just like to see more cool things like Crossroads 7. Just having those more options that you can kind of play this keyword that doesn't really have a master, so we can snowflake.
So another, I guess, design philosophy that could have guided versatile models might be to have them do things that are like truly unique in the game. And there are some of these, right? Like the Riders, their bonus action, all of their Revel abilities, those tend to be unique. Even like the Moonlit charge that the Hooded Rider has. I mean, that's just a bunch of charge attacks. But that, that effect is kind of the quote-unquote most basic of any of the Riders, and it's still pretty distinctive and pretty neat. And then you go on the other scales of like the Mechanical Rider, who just reactivates another model anywhere on the board, right? I mean, that's an ability you don't really see. So I think what Weird could have done, and maybe might consider in the future, is using Versatile as an opportunity to make just kind of like a wacky model. And maybe it's not good, but it's like you wouldn't want to saddle a keyword with a model that might do nothing. But for a versatile model, you might just kind of throw the ball up and see where it lands.
So thinking kind of like goblins and like fanatics and stuff like that, that it could be really good or it could be really bad, but it kind of gives you an option to play around with like, I guess, some very specific actions or very unique abilities.
Oh, you mean like GW goblins?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
GW goblins.
something like that. I mean, just something that's going to be pretty outside the box. You know, Magic, I think, has a lot of these cards, right? Of course, it's pretty hard to compare cards with models because the card pool is just going to be so much larger than the model pool can ever hope to be. But I think with versatiles, since they're not tied to a keyword, you really do have the opportunity to be more creative in what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if Weird had as a goal, oh, well, we should give these, we should make all these versatile models distinctive. That might help avoid making a bunch of models that are just kind of like overtuned beaters that crowd out other models.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I mean, you could even tie like these unique things that they do to the faction identity, right? Like Arcanists are supposed to be good at drawing cards. They think they draw more cards. Or...
Have like a card shuffling robot.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would kind of want to figure out what you wanted to say about each faction, maybe in a sense that's the clearest thing that joins masters within a faction to me are aesthetics, right? I don't think that there's like a lot of thematic or mechanical elements that carry from keyword to keyword within a faction. So versatiles could have been a way to kind of illustrate factional identity in model form.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a way you could do it is also kind of give the idea of how it functions, right? So maybe like Guild Guard are just like versatile models freely. Wait, they're not versatile, are they? But they're like freely available to all guild people because they're part of the guild and they can kind of requisition these guys to do whatever they want.
All right, so I think another way maybe to look at versatile is as a template for improving models that are currently bad in the game, right? So one of the things about versatile is that any keyword has access to it at its base cost. But there's a lot of keyword models that are subpar but cheaper than, you know, maybe some versatile. So one example that I like to use on, and I've used it a couple times on the forums. Everyone who listens to this podcast, even casually, knows that I think the Mole Men are terrible. I think they're probably the worst model in the game. I can't really ever see a reason why you would bring them other than to troll someone, right? Like to try to win with the Mole Men. But one of the ways Weird could improve these models, and they tend to be either lower cost models or really high cost models. The mid-range models, for whatever reason, don't seem to have this specific problem. But one way to improve them would be to make them do what another model does, but they're cheaper. So they're the better pick for this keyword. So like if the Mole Men had the ability to dig up a soul stone and gain stunned, they would, you know, instantly become a viable choice for Marcus over a soulstone miner. And they really wouldn't be something that I think you would want to take out of keyword because then it would cost 5. So a soulstone miner would just be 1 stone more, but a soulstone miner is clearly better than a Mole Man. And so this might sound like a really specific example, but I actually think if you looked at the versatile models and looked at what they were trying to do and look at the models that currently are just really problematic, and you try to move them in that direction or give them one of those capabilities that they currently lack, but the versatile model has, and that's why they're attractive. The reason why this idea appeals to me is because the versatile mechanics already exist in the game. And so there's already a pretty good sense of what, whether they're good or not. And how much they should cost in terms of like development points for a model. So I really think that if Weird made models, bad models, better by giving them clearer roles and using some of the stronger versatile models as templates for that could be a way for versatile to improve the game. Now that doesn't really fix the versatile issue necessarily, but it is, I think, a way for versatile to contribute to Malifaux.
For some reason when you started that, I went in like the exact opposite direction. I was thinking like, let's just make versatiles like knockoff versions of like the good models and other keywords. And I was thinking of like Robo-Sonic and stuff like that. It's like they're just gonna, like we'll just swap the stat cards for Molemen and Soulstone Miner. So it's like if you don't want to pay for Molemen, then you can get the knockoff mechanical Molemen.
It would be funny just to see people say, "Oh, Soulstone Miner is the worst model in the game." Yeah, so and I've said this twice already, but I just want to draw a line under it. We're not criticizing weird, versatiles. They don't break the game, but I do think that we are starting to see some of these issues crop up, in high level play, and it's not so much that like there are Super Friends lists. There's always going to be overtuned models. I think the major issue that we have with versatiles at the moment is that they really undermine the keyword system in a way that, like, the fact that they come free really just exacerbates this issue of identifying the most efficient models.
Yeah, we're just kind of like pointing out things that we have seen like that could be problematic, but it's not to say that like, oh, we know exactly how to fix this. It's just things we've noticed. And I think someone said it, but like players are really good at identifying issues, but they're really bad at fixing them. So I feel like that's kind of where we are right now. It's like we see this and it's something that we don't necessarily like, or we can see it going in a bad direction. And we're just kind of throwing out things that we think might help, but like, who knows?
Right.
Like there might be a much more elegant solution that we're not seeing.
All right, so I guess, in the last section we really wanted to move into was to kind of talk about some versatile models that we think work or that we like, or that we like as maybe design templates, and then maybe some that we don't. So I just start out with the ones we like. I like the effigies and the emissaries quite a bit. They're all interesting models. They all have their own kind of aesthetic, but it still ties to the faction's aesthetic, so I think thematically they work really well, which isn't always true of the versatiles. And then for the emissaries in particular, they're 10 stones, they're high cost, but they're all quality models that all can fit into any keyword pretty well, so you're getting good value from them. But I don't feel like, outside of maybe a couple of corner cases, I don't feel that they're in the auto take category.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, I love these things are emissaries. You're like,
yeah.
Like, so do you not? I mean, do you not think the emissaries like good models for the versatile system?
I mean, I guess it's just difficult for me because I'm still very solidly in the idea that versatiles shouldn't exist in and of itself. But I guess like the biggest thing is that I think the same thing you're mentioning that I'm kind of struggling with is I feel like at this point we're trying to justify a purpose for the versatile or find the purpose of versatiles in this game.
Mm-hmm.
I think effigies and emissaries, I like them as models. I like how they play, and I like that you can hire them to every faction. But it's like I don't feel like it being a versatile is necessarily a feature, right?
Uh-huh.
If they weren't versatile and with the tax and everything they're costed where they were, like would I like them more or would I like them less? And like I don't think so. But I guess like of the versatile models, like I do agree with you. Like lore wise, how the effigies and emissaries exist, I think it does make sense for them to be versatile.
What about, like, do you agree with me that thematically Weird has done a good job of making them evoke the sense of the faction to which they belong?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I feel like that, I think as we go into the versatile models that we have issues with, I think the consistent theme is that they're just kind of overperforming for what they are. So they just kind of, they're saying they just crowd out everything else. So then the versatile models that we like are the ones that have a very specific purpose and like, all right, if I need to like help kind of shore up this weakness in my crew, I'm going to hire in, this effigy or this emissary, but it's not like every time you're running this master, it's like 100% you're taking this emissary or 100% you're taking this effigy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sure. So the next model I want to talk about is Hans. Now, a lot of people on the internet don't like Hans because he's not a great model, right? There may be better 8-stone models, or he may not be kind of the most efficient option, and all those things may be true. But the reason why I like Hans is, first, he brings some of the like the anti-tech that we mentioned earlier, like, right, like he has Ruthless, which is always useful if you're going to be fighting a lot of terrifying or manipulative. and it comes, in a not overwhelming package, right? He has Ruthless, but he himself is not a model that's going to be just blowing things off the table. His damage track is pretty modest, which, again, a lot of people do criticize. But, I see Hans as an answer to specific problems. And I think that is a good developmental philosophical area for versatiles to sit in. Like, for the battle report we did with Vic and Raspy, I said I brought Hans. The reason I brought Hans is because I wanted him to slow and stun your Ice Golem, right? And Hans is 8 stones, the Ice Golem's 10 stones. So if I'm eliminating, if I'm reducing the Ice Golem to 1 action a turn because he's slow and stunned, that I think is a fine use for my 8 stone Hans model. And so the fact that I brought him because you brought the Ice Golem, like, to me, that's what I want Versatile to be. I brought him in the game for a very clear, very specific goal that my keyword was not going to be able to deliver.
And then I didn't bring the Ice Golem.
You didn't bring, and I set, you put that crescent forest, like, that dominated the middle of the board.
Yeah, I just snuck it on there while we were sitting around.
So Hans was just not the right model for that terrain set, which, is another indication that he is a model that works under specific circumstances. And if you don't recognize those circumstances correctly, you're not going to get value from him. And that, to me, is what sounds like a versatile model should be. I mean, really, that's probably what all models should be. But if you're saying, well, versatile is, kind of meant to be the missing tools in your toolbox, then it should definitely be even more true of them.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I was just going to agree again, so then you can go on.
Right. I guess I just didn't really think I needed to, like, wait to see what you were going to say, because, why wouldn't you agree with me? So I think the Lone Swordsman is kind of in a similar mold for me. The Lone Swordsman, he's a model I quite like. I don't bring him that often just because in 10 Thunders, he gets crowded out by better versatiles, like Fuhatsu, like Minaku Rei. She's not doing the same thing as the Lone Swordsman, but I think she's just a better model. The Shadow Emissary. But the Lone Swordsman, he's a model that I like quite a bit because he does have the Ruthless. But what I think is interesting about him is that because he has Adaptive, and he has a trigger on every suit for his sword, he can operate even in an environment where the rest of your models are really dependent on keyword synergy. And if we are saying that we think, as just a design goal, Weird should be tying things more closely to the keyword system, then the corollary for that should be that versatiles should be effective on their own. And I think the Lone Swordsman is a good example of that.
Were you waiting for me to agree with you again?
I was. I was being polite about it this time.
I also agree. I do like how you bring it up, that the idea that the versatile should have something to kind of make them work a little bit more independently, since they're basically being thrown in with all these like buddy keyword models. So it does make sense for like things that, like to have adaptive to make them run a little bit more efficiently, considering they can't actually kind of strengthen your existing keyword. But I think, again, that just kind of highlights the issue where in keywords where that synergy isn't really required, you're going to be looking at versatile models because they're going to be running more efficiently than your actual keyword models at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. The last one we have on our list, and I mean, if you come up with any more, I mean, it's not like we have to stop because the list ran out. But the last one on our pregame list was the Crossroad 7. I mean, I love the Crossroad 7. I could talk about them all day. But I think you were actually maybe the one who added this. What would you say about the Crossroad 7? Why is it in this category that we love them?
For the reasons you mentioned, they kind of have a very unique position. You would bring them against like very specific things. Like, I've been playing 10 Thunders lately, and I'm like, keep looking for a reason to bring Lust, but it's like so insanely specific the situation I would bring her in, because she only gives out sin tokens when an enemy model draws a card.
Well, yeah, other than her, sin spiral trigger, which isn't really easy to get.
Right. So then she has a very specific purpose. You know, it's like, I'm going to only bring her in against crews that have a lot of models that are like constantly drawing cards. But it's nice that, as I mentioned earlier, they have their own like kind of keywords. You can run Crossroads 7 as their own crew, and then all their synergies start stacking up and you can get some really interesting play, or I guess just get completely destroyed in an online vassal tournament with. But it's just, you know, for the things you have, they have very specific purpose. They're not, and I think they're very powerful in that role, but it's not necessarily something that's going to come up or going to have such a strong effect on the game that they're necessarily going to be the one thing that, you know, like single-handedly wins you a game. But they have a very strong design philosophy. They have a very cool thematic. And yeah, it's nice that every faction, well, I guess except for the Explorer Society, kind of has their own flavor of that they can kind of bring to bear in it. I feel like it kind of adds a little to, I guess, the faction identity, even if it's kind of inadvertent, in that they have a model that's able to turn off a very specific ability.
Yeah, the Crossroads 7 are actually a good example of, you know, what I talked about earlier, where one design philosophy for versatile models could have just been models with weird abilities. Like, not necessarily, you know, we don't know if these are good or not, but they're just kind of odd.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, you know, the Crossroads 7, they very much fit the bill. Like, each of them, as you said, they're kind of shutting down or at least complicating a facet of the game, right? Like, Sloth spreads out the sin tokens for healing, and, you know, Pride for cheating, and so on and so forth. But then when you look at the back of the card too, their actions are also unique, right? They're doing different things. Like Greed is a pretty niche model. You would not want to bring Greed very often. But if you're Guild and you're going to be playing against Colette Super Friends, Greed becomes a fantastic choice. And it's because of like the weird stuff that she does against Soulstone users and against models that have upgrade. So I think the Crossroads 7, even if you do lose some online tournament games with them, are interesting because there's different ways to play them. You can play them together as a crew, and that really appeals to people who like cross-factional stuff. You know, the 5-color Magic players and whatever else. And we may be a minority, but we are out there.
Literally dozens of us.
I just think that the Crossroads 7 are kind of an excellent format for how I would have liked to have seen versatile design in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool that it has a very strong theme, even though it's not very direct. You know, it's like they're a band, they all have their own instruments, and it's kind of cool to see out all on the table. And I feel like because they have that strong thematic thing, it probably made it a little bit easier to design them. And even if they kind of miss the mark as far as power level, they're just still great models to see.
I mean, I think for the most part, because they're only 7 stones, so I think on an individual basis they are balanced models, and I think they have clear uses. I bring Wrath with every Pandora crew I play. I bring Sloth into a number of Reser crews that I play, just because a 10-inch heal with no test is really good. Now, of course, he does hand out slow, which is a bit of a problem. It's a problem he could probably fix, because he can give fast to friendly undead. So I think that, and some of them may be more niche. Like I said, Greed is pretty niche. You probably wouldn't want to bring her that often, but in the circumstance where you do want to bring her, she's probably pretty effective. Gluttony is another one of those models where you don't want to bring him every game, but there's going to be pools where Gluttony's going to be worth his weight in gold.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite a lot, because Gluttony's a pretty beefy boy. As a crew together, are they, are they competitive, or are they really balanced together as a crew? In that case, no, not really. And part of that is just kind of the difficulty henchmen have, and then part of that is just the fact that even though they do have a good amount of synergy, in some strange ways they're actually they're not as synergistic as they really could be. So Sloth is a perfect example. Sloth's heal gives out slow, and he has an attack which gives out slow, but friendly undead can instead get fast. How much harder would it have been to say friendly undead or crossroad models could get fast, right? And then that would have been a way to increase the synergy between them. I mean, that's not instantly going to make them a super competitive crew. It's just one of the things I thought of during the games I was playing.
It's kind of weird that it's only undead. It's like, fuck you, Crossroads 7. Like, I hate this band.
Part of it is that, unlike in 2nd edition, where each action, even if it did the exact same thing, was unique. And so you might have to know the specific rules for each specific action. They might like vary in very slight ways or something, and that was kind of annoying. In third, they made the smart choice of just saying, okay, well, every trigger with the same name is going to work in pretty much the same way. And his action that gives slow but fast to friendly undead, that's an action that other models have.
Oh, okay.
So that's why they didn't change it. But they could have just given him a different action, right? And changed that one. And I know that kind of goes back to the thing I just criticized a second ago. But in this one specific niche case, I think it's okay. Or they could have given him a trigger to give a Crossroads 7 model fast. And built that suit in. Alright, so those are some versatile models we like. What is a versatile model that maybe we don't like?
Riders, it feels like they kind of like overperform a little bit, and you're taking these models over your keyword models just because they're so much more efficient at what they do. So like the rider models, like this is one of the issues in, I guess, the Colette Super Friends list. Being able to basically give you another activation on any model you want is insanely powerful.
As long as it's not a master.
As long as it's not a master. I guess this kind of goes into, having that kind of like unique power capability that something for a versatile could be good at, or might be kind of cool to see within versatiles. But I think the issue with the riders, I guess honestly probably the main issue, is that they're just very good for their cost. So then they give you so much mobility. Come turn 3, they have pretty much like game-changing abilities on all of them. And like the only one we don't see as much, I guess, is probably the Hooded Rider, and that's because his game-changing ability is not that good.
Yeah,
it's I guess like not as strong.
It's not like an auto win, or it's not as game changing or something, but it's still quite effective. And I would agree with you that, I mean, the riders cost 11 stones, so they are not cheap models, and yet they are still probably undercosted. They're also just generally and universally good, which is probably why they crowd out so many models. Those 5 suit triggers on their bonus action, it is, they do tend to be a capability that other models don't really have in the game. So from like the standpoint of, I thought you said versatile should like have a strong identity and be doing a specific thing that maybe doesn't exist in the game. Okay, that is true. But the problem is the Hooded Riders are universally applicable, which is what makes them very strong. And you contrast that maybe with the Crossroads 7, who also have unique abilities, but they are not just like universally A-list models on their own, who then also have like kind of cool fringe abilities. The Riders they're very strong, and their abilities, they're not fringe at all. They're just incredibly good.
So another versatile model that we kind of have an issue with is the Midnight Stalker, and it's kind of for the same reasons. So if you're playing into Outcast, like if you're looking for a schemer, the Midnight Stalker is so good at scheming that you're kind of overlooking most things that you're going to have in keyword, because he has leap built in, which means he can ignore all this terrain. When he goes onto the enemy half of the board, which is where you want all your schemers to be anyway, suddenly he's fast, so he has 3 AP, and with leap effectively 4 AP a turn, so like move, reposition anywhere he needs to be on the board, drop scheme markers, and if you kill him, you can discard a card and he comes back to life, and if you put an upgrade on him, like he's hard to kill on top of that. So he's like very difficult to kill. He has an insane amount of mobility and AP available to him to like be where he needs to be and do what he needs to do. And it's just to the point where it's like, why would you be looking at other scheme runners?
Well, he's not actually, he doesn't actually have leap built in. He doesn't have the suit. But he does have showboating. So when you cheat for that low mask, you get to draw a card with him. And no, I mean, I agree with you. The Midnight Stalker is part of, I think he does a good job of illustrating the versatile issue. But he does a universally applicable thing, scheme running, or in some cases denial, but because, as you said, you usually want him the other half of the board. And he does all the things that you want a scheme runner to do. He has high mobility, he's survivable, and at 8 stones, he's maybe a bit more expensive than you would want for a dedicated scheme runner, but he's well worth his cost. And so he just is going to crowd out other scheme running options because he himself is at the top of the curve. And there's nothing like niche about him that makes him say that, the Midnight Stalker is the right scheme runner in this pool, but not in this pool. No, he's always the right choice if you need a scheme runner. What's another model that is on our hate list? Or at least your hate list, right? Because I mean, we don't necessarily have the same hate models.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you should take this one too, because basically whenever versatiles come up or Ten Thunders come up, you always have to go on your little rant about Fuhatsu. So how about you take this one?
Fuhatsu is very much on my list. He's just a phenomenal model. He's ruthless. He's got his plus flip on his gun, so things that you try to do, if you're, let's say you're a terrifying crew, like Jackdaw, right? And part of the, I'm terrified of, I'm scared of when you actually pick up Fuhatsu. I'm just gonna stop playing Daw against you, because if you're playing someone who has ruthless and you know that Daw's crew is relying on terrifying to survive, you can say things like, oh, okay, well, you know what? You're ruthless. I'm going to try to use this forest to give you minus flip. But Fuhatsu has a built-in plus flip, so he's ignoring. And so when you give that to a ruthless model, you're really shrinking the range of counterplay that someone has against you. And if Fuhatsu were supposed to be an answer piece, if the theory was, let's give Fuhatsu ruthless because 10 Thunders need a way to deal with terrifying, that's fine. But then the person who's playing the defenses that have just been negated by ruthless, they also need answer mechanic. And Fuhatsu just takes away a lot of those. He's got his keywordless scatter. He's other than the fact that you don't really want him walking, he's a really great choice for positional schemes because he can push people out of the way. He has Laugh It Off, so he can't be lured off of stuff. He's survivable because he has a built-in heal. And he's 9 stones. That's not really, that's getting into the expensive model range, but he's very much worth it. And so I just think that he is a model that you are never wrong to pick, and I don't think that that's good for versatiles. All right, what about you?
I haven't played against him too much, but like Mecharachnid, in the times that I have played against him, has been kind of an issue. And like one of the things that always struck me as kind of odd is that the only other model that has the ability for precise is McMorning. So in a sense, he has you have a master level ability sitting on this 6 stone unimpeded model with armor 2, 5 health, and at only 6 stones, you can slot him in and it's just able to ignore defenses on so many models. And the kind of tech you need to bring in, or the way that you have to tech against him, is almost always going to be at a higher cost than what you can bring in the Mecharachnid for. And the fact that he's versatile goes into the problem with being able to blindside people, right? Because if I'm fighting against a crew that, doesn't usually have armor or isn't very tanky, and then all of a sudden they have a couple Mecharachnids, oh, well, I didn't bring anything for armor, so I guess it's going to take me 5 activations to burn through these things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. It's, their bonus action also makes them severely overperform for their cost.
Right, yeah, just being able to take a piece of scrap or a ski marker on the board and then just get plus flips on their attacks, because at that point, they have a free AP to deny schemes to the opponent and actively gain a benefit from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Vasilisa would be an example of a model that I don't like. And I think she just does too much, and she does it too efficiently. Her thematics are pretty good, so it's not like I don't want her to exist, but I think, in Malifaux, especially if you're playing against stronger players, I feel like being able to drag down their efficiency, the opposing model's efficiencies, is a good way to attack them. And so Vasilisa does bring that capability, but I think she does it too easily and too effectively. She's also a summoner, and I don't like summoners, just as a rule, because I think summoning is overtuned. And I don't want to see her making more Stitch together.
I don't know. It's absolutely insane to me that Vasilisa just has a global buff to puppets to just hand out staggered without any test. It's oh, you existed in this area. And it just seems like if you're actually running a puppet crew, that's such an insanely powerful ability to have linked to a model.
Yeah, in our Claudia episode, we said that Puppet is one of those few henchman-led crews that actually does work on maybe, the level of a master-led crew. And Vasilisa is no small part of that, just because of the ability that she's giving to all your models. generally, I think anything that always works with no test reduces the amount of counterplay that exists in the game. And I think that is a bad trend for Malifaux to go down. All right, and I guess the last model we want to hit on the hate is the Soulstone Miner. Soulstone Miner, I think the issue with a model like the Soulstone Miner is that Weird has a clear idea of thematically what they want this model to do. But putting that theme into a model is problematic. There's no way you're going to make a model like the Soulstone Miner expensive, because, it's just supposed to be kind of like this cheap underground drilling thing. If Soulstone Miners were expensive, they wouldn't be worth it. So Soulstone Miners, just by their design, they're going to be a cheap or moderate cost model, and they're at 6 stones, so they're pretty cheap. But it's just they're another one of those models that's never a bad choice. They give you stones, they're giving you another activation. They're a safe harbor for magical training, because you can, and if you want to, you can make it virtually impossible for the enemy to kill it unless they have anti-berry tech. And even though they did get nerfed, they're still good schemers. They're not as good, obviously, as they were, but when people take them, they're often used to do the breakthrough or sabotage or spread them out. Anytime you want a lot of fast movement and you maybe want scheme markers across the table, they're a great option.
Yeah, I mean, having a model that can appear anywhere on the board is generally pretty good.
Well, not quite anywhere. I think it's like 6 inches from the enemy deployment zone, but I mean, that's not much of a restriction. In flank, it means a little bit more than the others, but yeah, even in flank, you're going to find plenty of good places to put them.
Right.
And they actually, they're useful in their own right. Their ability to blow up a whole bunch of destructible terrain make them a really great pick against, like Raspy or Euripides. And they're the kind of model that didn't really need value add abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Just their kit is already so good that to make them answers also is problematic, because you're never wrong to take a Soulstone Miner, even though we're not saying always take a Soulstone Miner, right? Because, I mean, you can make a crew and not have a Soulstone Miner and still win the game, surprisingly enough. But when they are models that you're always going to get good value from, and then against certain masters, there's an incentive to take them, that, again, is kind of a problem with to me, with the versatile system.
Yeah, you're basically just getting better models at cost.
Uh-huh. All right. Well, so I think we should wrap up by saying, versatile is an interesting concept. People say versatile didn't exist in second, and technically that's true, but there was something kind of like it in second edition, so it's not like, you were ever playing pure keyword. And I do think that trying to emphasize the keyword system is also problematic. There's no easy answer for these. But in my opinion, currently, the versatiles are starting to become enough of an issue with the game that I would like Weird to take another look at them.
Wait, in second edition, wasn't pretty much everything versatile?
Well, so kind of, but also there was this mercenary keyword, or, well, they weren't a keyword, but there's this mercenary ability, which could also let you grab things out of faction if it shared, I don't remember what they called it, like a trait or something. Okay. So, like, for instance, when I played Colette, I could bring the Kunoichi. They were called the Oiran back then, because they were also showgirls. And Oiran had an ability to increase your willpower, and that was really useful in the second edition meta, because Rotten Bells had a stat 8 lure that was just super strong. Now, of course, it was never really worth it to do it in anyways, because, you always just wanted to take your super friends. But if you wanted to try to play a more thematic Colette list, which I did try to do.
I see.
All right, well, so that was my summation. Do you have any kind of wrap-up thought about versatiles?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just repeating, but I feel like, they wanted to make keyword a bigger thing to kind of help new players get into the game, and also to have some kind of incentive for people to actually play like thematic crews and enforce synergy. But I feel like versatiles are kind of working against that idea. The fact that you have these models that can be hired into any keyword with no penalties at all is just kind of saying like, all right, well, we want everyone to play in keyword and play on theme. And if they want to go against that, they're going to have to pay more, except for all these guys. And part of the issue is just that we're not really sure what the design philosophy or the requirements for being a versatile model are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have some versatile models that we feel like are in a decent spot in that they're very specific in what they do and they're good at that, but they're not necessarily ever going to be overpowering in a game. Whereas you have other versatiles that are, you know, they're at the top of the curve for their role in the game to the point where it's, you have to convince yourself not to take them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or, you know, be like you and just don't buy versatile models.
I guess, like, at what point do you stop being a new player?
I think at the point where you abuse people with Kaladi, you can no longer sit behind a new player defense.
I was still in keyword, though.
Alright, well, so as you can tell, we have opinions about versatile. Like most opinions, they are kind of scattershot, and some of them aren't really well formed, but the underlying note, the note behind the note from both of us, I think, is just that we do not have a great sense of what Weird wanted out of versatiles, and we think that for a program like Versatile to exist, the design philosophy behind the concept of versatiles should have been really clear based on what the models do. That's going to do it for us for tonight. If you've stuck around so far, thank you very much. You know, we play down here in Southern California, but that's just one part of the Malifaux community, and we would like to be part of the wider discussion. It's why we're doing this podcast, or at least in part. So if you have any thoughts about how we're doing, please let us know. We love receiving feedback. Thank you very much to everyone who has sent a message. And we have a Facebook, we have a Discord, you can leave us voicemails on our Anchor site, which a couple of people have done. We're on Reddit, you know, we have a website. However you want to reach out to us, we would just love to hear what you think about our show, what you think we're doing well, what we could do better, some other stuff you'd like us to cover, you know, whether or not Colgan should really just get a button that plays, yes, Jeff, you're right. You know, just let us know. We also have a PayPal and a Patreon, so if you'd like to support the channel in that way, that would be appreciated. And, you know, a shout out for our Patreon backers and, you know, anyone who's supported the channel in that way or in any way, whether it's through feedback or even just listening to the channel or listening to the episodes. Thank you very much. And